Welcome back to the Jackson Neill Sports Podcast. It's Monday, March 11th, 2019. Feeling good today. It's a nice day here in Philadelphia, finally starting to feel like spring. Don't want to jinx it too soon, but it's feeling nice today. Have a really fun show planned for you guys today. Two big topics I want to touch on. One, NFL free agency, just how big the storylines are right now, and I want to compare it a little bit to the MLB and NBA in terms of how it's playing out this offseason. Also, want to go over to the National Basketball Association and touch on the Golden State Warriors, because last night they lost to the Phoenix Suns of all teams, and things do not look good. Klay Thompson going after fans. Kerr and Draymond don't look good. Kevin Durant's injured. A lot of stuff going wrong in Golden State, so I want to talk about that. Remember, you can check this podcast out on SoundCloud, Stitcher, iTunes, YouTube, Spotify, wherever you like to listen to podcasts. But now, the hub for all Jackson Neill podcasts is jacksonneillpodcasts.com. Got myself my own website there. There you can check out all episodes of this, as well as my other podcasts, so please check that out. So, diving right into this, today, I was just looking on ESPN.com, looking through Twitter, looking at some of the big sports headlines, watching some TV shows about doing the normal kind of day-to-day things I do to, keep in touch with sports, see what's going on. And any website I seem to go to, any Twitter feed I seem to look at, any major publication, whether it's ESPN, Yahoo, Bleacher Report, all of them right now are really focused on the NFL free agency. And rightfully so when you look at the big names that are moving. We saw Antonio Brown go to the Oakland Raiders over the weekend. That certainly was a very big move. But then you see other moves. Right now we're seeing Landon Collins, the safety, he's still going to the Redskins, 6 years, $84 million. You see the Lions adding multiple players. You're seeing Frank Gore sign with the Bills. There is tons and tons of moves going on right now, and just right there, those were the top three stories on ESPN.com, one of the biggest sports websites there really is out there. So it's a lot is going on in the NFL, and headline news, headline stuff, things people that are storylines that people are talking about. And while this doesn't seem all that out of the ordinary for the NFL, it's starting to seem like the NFL has really joined the NBA in terms of sports leagues that have gotten free agency right. Because free agency is a period in your league where lots of change, and if you notice how sports are covered nowadays, if you notice how fans seem to care about sports, so much is put on the storyline. So much is put on how many months out of the year can you get a fan's attention. I would argue that right now, the NBA's biggest time could be that time from the end of the finals to about middle July. Maybe even include the finals in there, but that time of the finals, where it's the biggest sporting event going on right then in America, then leading into all of that free agency discussion, whether it's talking about Kevin Durant that year, or LeBron James every single year it seems like, or other big players possibly where they can move, people signing, all of those movements, it becomes the biggest sport in America, undoubtedly, for that at least month period. It dominates the conversation in a way, honestly, unlike any other sport really does. Even when the NFL is in, Super Bowl mode, we saw this year the NBA start to steal some headlines from the NFL. Super Bowl week didn't even feel all that big because there was that Anthony Davis trade saga. And the NBA has done it better than any other league because it's such a star-driven league, is the fact that even players who might not be the best or in their prime anymore, think somebody like Dwight Howard, if a move happens with him, it still grabs headlines because of the star power associated with that league. That there are so many big names and big faces there, to the point where games don't really drive the national discussion and fan interest anymore. What drives it are big superstar names, are big players, big faces, big people that fans can really get behind. And no other league has capitalized that better than the NBA. And I think that's become pretty obvious over the past several years. However, I think this is a very important time to give props to the NFL. Because right now, we're on today is March 11th, but the beginning of March, in this time frame, there's a lot going on. Right now, obviously, the NBA, trade deadline's over, but it's still some playoff pushes for these teams. I mean, there's still storylines. I'm going to be talking about the Warriors later. So there's still some stuff going on with that league. Meanwhile, the NHL, I know I didn't mention them, and it's kind of a tier below as the fourth league, but still, that's in its prime season. Then you add in the fact that college basketball is going on right now with all of the conference tournaments, March Madness coming up. It's starting to become, its big moment in sports. So there's a lot going on right now, whether with two major pro sports in season, then in some towns, baseball spring training, getting excited for that. I'm in Philadelphia right now. After that Bryce Harper signing, it's very, very, very big. So certain towns for their baseball teams starting to drum up interest during spring training. It's a heavy period is what I'm trying to say. It's a very congested time in sports. And yet, you see the NFL have some of the biggest storylines going on right now. And why is that? And that's because the NFL has done what the NBA has done so well, is that they've been able to condense free agency in a way where most of the big signings happen as soon as possible. Where as soon as the league is open for the offseason and trades and signings and all of that, you're going to be seeing, first of all, you're already seeing deals agreed beforehand, but you're going to be seeing them finalized, extra deals, all that great stuff, to the point where free agency, rather than being stretched out over this long period of time, because when it's stretched out over this long period of time, maybe that Landon Collins story isn't as important. Maybe Frank Gore going to the Bills, not so much. Antonio Brown would always dominate the headlines, but the Lions adding several players, you can get kind of lost in the shuffle. But when it's all happening back to back, when there's a new signing every hour, a new idea for new trade outlooks possibly happening, it's constant fire. It's that the rising tide lifts all boats kind of situation, where the fact that there's so many storylines brings attention to all the other ones. And the NFL is doing such a good job on capitalizing on that and just gaining America's attention, because the NFL as a league is still, in terms of viewer ratings, the pinnacle of American sports. They still get the higher ratings than anyone else, and honestly, nobody can really touch them. And I think it plays very well into the fact that, it's a weekly game, so that you just condition it every Sunday and Monday night. Thursday night, not so much, but still so, that they have certain games a week, so every game is much must-watch. Whereas for the NBA, 82-game season, all those playoff games, it really doesn't become, I would say, must-watch unless your team is, game or two for the playoffs right towards the end of the regular season, or game 6s, game 7s, game 5s in the playoffs, especially then you go into the finals, when then every game is must-watch. So when comparing those two leagues, though, I don't think ratings are the right way to show it, because, through that model, NFL will dominate, because every game you need to see, every game you need to watch. However, when you compare them, you should be looking at, okay, who is driving the national conversation? Who owns more months out of the sports calendar? And while the NFL had that, the NBA is really, really creeping up into their space. During the summer, that middle of July to middle of June, to probably middle of July period, that was a solid time for baseball to finally get, some of its season headlines really going, but more so even the NFL talking about going into training camps. Well, not too much going on. NBA completely stole that and owns it now. Even a week for the NFL that would seem, indestructible, Super Bowl week, the NBA crept up in it this year. Anthony Davis and LeBron James, those storylines about a possible trade and what's going on between the Pelicans and Lakers and the Celtics, and all of that was beating out the Super Bowl. Go back to that week. Watch the sports TV shows, listen to sports radio, look at what's trending on Twitter, look at what people are talking about, and the people were talking about the NBA. Now, that could have something to do with the fact that, the Patriots were in the Super Bowl yet again, and that might have drove down interest, but you still had Boston versus Los Angeles in the Super Bowl. LA was in the Super Bowl for the first time in years. It was a rematch, two giant cities from two opposite coasts. That should play in to perfect perfect national conversation. The storylines between McVay and Belichick and Goff and Brady, all those conversations, and yet the NBA beat that out. So what you're seeing is the NBA is starting to become more of a year-round sport like the NFL has been for the past several years, but has been taken over by basketball. But with the NFL now, as I'm seeing this free agency period with here towards, I guess, the tail end of February, now leading into about the middle of March, man, the NFL, that's all I want to talk about, really. That's all anybody really wants to talk about. That's what everyone is getting them buzzing. So this little time period where, you just thought was supposed to be middle of the season for basketball and hockey and gearing up for March Madness, the NFL's come in and said, we'll take that because we're going to make free agency, we're going to make these trades, and we're going to try and make them in this short period so that it's rapid fire, it's quick fire, deal. And now, once March Madness gets picked up going, and college basketball will retake that, its national kind of place because obviously March Madness dominates just so as much. But this is great momentum for the NFL so that as soon as March Madness is done, yes, it's NBA playoffs, but the NFL draft's coming up, and we had all these moves recently. So I think the NFL, I want to give them credit for looking at how their free agency is done, and rather than it being more spread out over the course of an offseason, really condensing it. I think it was something they agreed upon recently to make it a shorter period, and that's allowing them to compete with leagues like the NBA. And I want to bring in the MLB into this conversation because Major League Baseball really, in a way, was able to gain fan interest by having this Bryce Harper situation go on forever. But if I'm being honest, if baseball could have just had everything taken care of at the winter meetings, it would have made everything so much more interesting. Because every offseason in any sport, there's usually about 1 to 2 stars you really care about to see where they're going. For the NFL, we're looking at Antonio Brown and now Le'Veon Bell, so the conversations are really circling around them. But then when you condense it into one period, then, like I said, moves like Landon Collins, the Lions adding players, Frank Gore signing, those kind of get lifted up into the national conversation because it's rapid-fire moves. If you were to have that with baseball, if you were to have had Machado and Harper signing during the winter meetings, then all those other moves, because there's a ton of moves in baseball, all those other moves would have gained significance as well. So I think the MLB, a league not very good when it comes to adapting and changing with the times, definitely needs to take into consideration and think, should they shrink their free agency period and try to, force it into quicker signings like we're seeing with the NFL, like the NBA does with the middle of June and opening it up July 1st, and about everything basically being the major moves being done, and a lot of them being done by July 14th or so. I think that's a conversation baseball needs to have because, I know Bryce Harper came here to Philadelphia and fans are very excited about it. So in this city, it was a well worth the wait. But on the national scale, it was just really, really tiresome. It was, if he didn't pick your team, if you were a fan in Milwaukee and not in this Bryce Harper sweepstakes, I doubt it was really holding your interest all that much. Now, if there was this 2-week period where all the baseball moves were really happening, 2 to 3 week to 3.5 week period where all these baseball moves were happening left and right, including ones like Bryce Harper and Manny Machado, and then all the other, more mid-tier moves, I think that captures people's interest way more. I think it really starts to help your sport become more year-round and not lose the headlines, because that's what's valuable really right now in 2019, is that if you start to dominate headlines, start to dominate some of the national conversation, it pays dividends. I think you look at the Bryce Harper signing. When he signed, I see an ESPN The Magazine feature on him. Even that, though, that gets pushed down towards the bottom of the page because of these NFL moves. But when Harper signed, you get a big piece. You get a big piece on him, and a giant publication. All the outlets are covering it. Then in the city he signs with 220,000 tickets signed in that first weekend. His jersey sales beat out LeBron James. I think it was on Fanatics for the most in a 48-hour period. you have big things happen. But having them spread out diminishes their impact. It's more important about owning weeks in a year. In a calendar year, what weeks, what months can you own? And I think baseball could really have something if they were to do it during the winter meetings time and almost condense this free agency, because I think it was 116 days or something like that, right, for Harper, and anyone is going to lose interest after that much time passes. So I kind of want to switch gears right now and head over to the NBA, where Golden State, obviously the power that the Warriors have been in the NBA now, this season, and for the past years winning all these titles, there's starting to be a little bit of discontent, I guess you would say, a little bit of problems over there in the Bay Area. Last night, the team lost to the Phoenix Suns, 115-111. As you know, the Phoenix Suns are not very good, one of the worst teams in the NBA, on pace to be in the race for the top pick. Furthermore, Kevin Durant suffered an ankle contusion. Then, after the game, Klay Thompson rips the Golden State fans, saying they need more energy. And then also Steve Kerr and Draymond Green, not looking good between them, almost looking like Kerr is beginning to be fed up with Green. So, as you can see, basically, tons of stuff going on right now with Golden State. Honestly, pretty surprised that none of the headlines are centered around DeMarcus Cousins. I think that's a good sign from him, a big man who's going to be looking for a contract after signing the short term with Golden State. You argue with him that, hey, he's always been a troublemaker and he's always in the headlines. When everyone else on his roster, when every other star on that team seems to be in the headlines, the two who's not, honestly, are DeMarcus Cousins and Steph Curry. So I guess that's one positive takeaway I can have from this. But looking at the larger picture for Golden State, I have been thinking for some time that the Warriors are going to be dismantled sometime sooner rather than later. And I guess my viewpoint on this comes down to the cynical dynasties and these groups of stars just don't last as long in the current sports age as we think they would. That with things along with free agency, with how normal it is for trades and player movement, just got done talking about how much there is in the NBA and how many headlines that grabs. With all of that, you don't see these stars stay together for as long as you would think. I mean, I think the prime example I would point to is LeBron James in Miami. That, the infamous whatever you would show or introductory they had, not LeBron, not 1, not 2, not 3, not 4, so many numbers, ends up winning a couple ends up winning a couple titles. But what was he there, about 5 years? I think about 5 or 4 years. If you looked at that going into it, you would have expected way more. This is a dynasty built for length, and yet he was on the move. And then he goes to Cleveland, and again, he's there for several seasons, and then he's on the move. So I think you look at these dynasties, especially in the NBA right now, and they just don't last for as long as we expect them to. Kobe Shaq was great while it was going on, but did you see how long that lasted? D-Wade and Shaq got a finals win out of that. The Big Three with Boston, that's a finals win. There's these dynasties, these groups of star players just don't stick around for as long as we think. The one prime example I could really think of would be the Spurs with Tim Duncan, Tony Parker, Manu Ginobili. But even then, they were all superstar players, at least star players. Tim Duncan is a superstar player, but in terms of the word superstar, we all know the Spurs did not really act that out. I mean, they could win a title and barely capture a headline while doing it. That's just a whole different beast down there in San Antonio, and you're even seeing that. That was a really special group because we thought it was all about the organization. Yes, it's a great organization, but look at what's happened with Kawhi there recently. So even organizations like the San Antonio Spurs, if we want to go outside of basketball, even organizations like the Pittsburgh Steelers, these organizations that have, decades, in the Steelers' case, decades upon decades of success and a tradition of winning and a tradition of excellence and not dysfunction, you still get Antonio Brown and Le'Veon Bell every once in a while. You still can mismanage a situation like Kawhi Leonard. And the way that star athletes are nowadays, and the way that free agency works, and just how often trades are, it's hard to keep these guys together. Just because I think of the simple fact of just egos and, wanting that attention. I just got done talking for 15 minutes about what sport holds the most attention in the year. And that's because that's so important nowadays, is that attention equals dollar signs. Headlines equal a bigger brand for that player, and the bigger their superstar is, the more jerseys they can sell, the more whatever, the more valuable they become. So with all of that in mind, this Golden State Warriors dynasty, in my mind, is starting to surpass how long I think it would last. In my mind, this would have been tops their last year, where everything going right for them, this would be their last year for everything falling apart. I thought there was a chance that things could have gotten ugly this past free agency period. Didn't. They actually gained DeMarcus Cousins, but I expected the Warriors to have a fall off way sooner than this. They're exceeding my expectations at this point in the ways that they're able to keep their similar role players around them as well as their stars. But with all this star power, there just comes simple facts. Klay Thompson, if he was on, give me any team that needs a scorer. Honestly, a team like the Phoenix Suns, if he was on the Phoenix Suns, Klay Thompson could put up a lot of points. He could be one of the league's top scorers. Honestly, Kevin Durant would be. Steph Curry would be. Draymond Green would get a lot more stats on a bad team. DeMarcus Cousins would. It's that obvious thing. There's only so many shots you can take for each given team. Is that players, we've seen how Klay Thompson can go off at certain times. If he statistically wanted to put up more points or more whatever, or more three-point field goals made, he could in another spot and get way more shots and way more opportunities to do that. And while usually winning solves all of that, the problem with the Warriors is that they've won all of these years. They've won all of these titles. They're on pace to win another one, folks. They have titles upon titles. Klay is going to have lots of championships under his belt. So will Draymond. So will Steph. KD is going to be having another championship under his belt. Look at the players, though, in the press. The two players in the press who are starting to cause a stir a little bit, between Draymond and Steve Kerr, a player and a coach who've won a lot of finals. If you add in Kerr's finals as a player, then you get really ridiculous. Then you talk about Klay ripping fans in the media. He has a lot of finals under him. I mentioned DeMarcus Cousins. Kevin Durant, the reason I'm only talking about him is because he has an ankle contusion. But these guys, Kevin Durant, not as many finals as the other Warriors players. DeMarcus Cousins, none. For them, a title means so much more than maybe to someone else who has, already has 3. Already has multiple championship rings. So as they gain more titles, as they gain more championships, put more banners up in the rafters, the appeal of winning diminishes. The appeal of getting that championship diminishes because they've had seasons upon seasons of that. But you know what Klay Thompson hasn't had? He's never had a scoring title. He's never been in the MVP race. He's never been viewed as the star on a team. And I don't know if these are valuable to Klay Thompson, but I think a lot of it would be looked at as valuable to a lot of NBA players, and something that, after winning so many titles, you might have to start to consider. I'm not even touching on the fact that these guys have to have, pay cuts in order to make this all work. Now, I think pay cuts are a little overstated in today's NBA, especially when you're dealing with players like Steph Curry, Klay Thompson, and Kevin Durant especially, because they all have lucrative shoe deals. When you get to players like Draymond Green and DeMarcus Cousins that don't have as lucrative sneaker lines and deals with companies, that then the contract definitely is more. But for someone like Kevin Durant, he honestly could get paid $0 by the Warriors, and he would be making tens of millions of dollars, probably over $100 million or so if he, from Nike. That's just how big his deal is. Curry makes a lot from Under Armour. Klay Thompson, he's with that Chinese shoe manufacturer. So I think you look at all of those factors, and you start to think, and you see these, with Draymond and Kerr and with Clay talking about the Golden State fans, you start to understand why fractures can happen and why this is the perfect locker room, honestly, to have it happen in. Because when all the players are just hungry for a title, when they want that championship, they want that first or second championship, it's alluring to just, put your differences aside, let's win as a team. But once winning a championship becomes the norm and what's expected, that's a lot of pressure. The appeal might go down. As a star, being with other stars kind of hurts my stats. When you have a big three, there has to be a Chris Bosh. And there's 5 stars in this roster, on this starting lineup. So I don't know, Draymond Green, I'm calling him a star. I guess I use that term a little loosely in terms of, I think of more the respect that he's gotten from his game over the past several years and just his name recognition. I think he's on that star level. I don't know if he's playing exactly up to that at all points, but you have to view it as 5 stars on this team. And all of that, whether it's wanting to put up your own stats, the allure of winning just is not as great once you've won. I think that all really starts to play into it, and I'm not going to be surprised if Golden State wins another championship but still breaks up after this in this offseason. Because sports dynasties don't last that long in pro sports like they used to. And honestly, some dynasties don't last as long as most people realize. MJ and the Bulls were great, but their last title was in 98. So they had the 90s, were pretty much were MJ and the Bulls. When he was in baseball, then the Rockets were able to take over for a little bit, but the 90s were kind of his time. But there was still that time with the Rockets when he was at baseball. He didn't dominate until about a year or so into the 90s. And then there was still 99 where he didn't win the title. So you don't see these dynasties, one of my point is, you don't see them last for as long as we always give them credit for. The days of Bill Russell winning 13 championships or being in 13, winning 11, I can't even keep it straight at this point, is over. I think we're going to see more superstar teams come together, more different dynasties that last for 3 or 4 seasons, but that's it. They last for 3 or 4 seasons, and then one of the stars, and then naturally the other one, and possibly even the third, or whatever the jumble is, they move on for greener pastures where they can get their MVP accolades or whatever else they're searching for. With that'll wrap it up for this edition of the Jackson Neill Sports Podcast. Thank you so much for listening. Remember, you can find us on all the platforms previously mentioned, but also on JacksonNeillPodcasts.com. If you're not on there right now, go check it out. Links are in the description to that. You can catch all my podcasts, whether it's this one, my music podcast where I talk about the latest stories in music, or Anything Goes with Jackson Neill, my long-form podcast, mostly musician interviews, but some other ones as well. My latest interview with Thutmose, it's a really cool video one I did with him in person. That's up right now on JacksonNeillPodcasts.com, so go give that a listen. Also, if you really like the content, if you really are enjoying all of my episodes that I put out from all 3 of my podcasts, then become a member for the Jackson Neill Podcast on Patreon. It's a cool platform that lets you kind of become a member with different tier levels. You get access to bonus content, a Q&A show with me, maybe even your own interview with me, depending on the membership tier you want to subscribe to. So that's a really cool thing I've just started up for the Jackson Neill Podcast. Go down in the description, click on the link that tells you about being a member on Patreon.com. Also, down in the description are links to my social media. At Jackson Neill 20 on Instagram and Twitter. I post some really cool content, at least I like to think, on there, so go check those out and give me a follow as well. Thank you so much for listening. I'll see you all next time.